prayed over my mama. This is part 6. The next day was February 3rd. This day after the evangelist had my mom call me on freeway. I decided to call my mom. I was still very hurt over that phone call. I told my mom that I was really hurt. I said, I know that you don't like that I am inserting myself in this, but I don't feel good about this. I'm looking out for your best interests. I am not comfortable with you spending or putting your money, any money, up front, to this woman. And of course it was, they're good people. They're good people, Rayanne, and I'm sorry that you felt this way. And admittedly, which I do regret, I was very hurt. I was hurt. I just said, Mom, I gotta go. I'm tired. I gotta go. I said, I need to see something. And I got off the phone. If I had known what the next few months would have brung, I wouldn't have been so hurt. It really hurt that my mom seemed to gravitate towards whatever she seemed to say on the phone call and discounting me, her daughter, who always looked out for her. Always. If I found out that my mom didn't have something, I would make sure she got it. Even if it cost me, going into debt, I made sure my mom had it. But yet, here she was, listening to this woman, giving her money. And she never really did tell me how much money she ultimately gave her. And if I'm being honest, I'm still honestly really hurt today. She craved outside relationships, friendships, even at the age of 78. Because I said earlier, she had gone through her marriage not having many real friends. Now, since my mother has passed, I know my daughter has looked through several of her journals that she kept, and I haven't been able to bring myself to look through them yet. But one recurring theme I understand from my daughter is that she would write at great lengths about how she wanted a friend. I think that longing for a friendships or genuine relationships or friendship actually contributed in this playing of the con. I've had a lot of time to reflect on things, and what I know now that really took me some soul searching and a lot of hurt to get to the point is I see now that my mom was essentially groomed by this evangelist. I fully believe that the moment my mother and father walked into that church and they saw that my father was dealing with Alzheimer's, because at this point when they joined this church now, this church is a smaller church. It's a small, close-knit church, and a lot of family in this church. And I think that's what drew my mom to this church. But my father's Alzheimer's was noticeable. It was noticeable to the point because my father, as I said, he was a Vietnam veteran, and he would constantly retell stories about his time in Vietnam, and even stories about how he received his Purple Heart, because he's very proud of that. And I believe once they saw my father interact, in the church, and saw how flustered my mother would get trying to deal with sometimes his inappropriate things he would say. I think others, well, I know for a fact from others that I've talked to, that they could see that my mom, was in a vulnerable position. Because, mind you, I told you, my dad used to run things in the household. And my mom was used to, acquiescing to whatever he wanted. And my dad would hate for my mom to tell people that, he had Alzheimer's. And you could tell by talking to him that something was off. I believe this is when the evangelist took note and decided that my mother was going to be their next mark. Because of my father's Alzheimer's, she was able to make more of the decisions. There was a time where my father decided that he didn't want to go to that church no more and he wanted to leave. But my mom was the one that was able to drive. Because once I found out his Alzheimer's diagnosis, I made sure that I contacted DMV and had him tested so that they ended up revoking his driver's license. And so my mom was the one who drove. And because she was the one that drove, they stayed at that church. Now, as my father's Alzheimer's progressed, I would often tell my mom, Mom, you need to put him in a home. You can't do this. Now, mind you, my mom was in her mid-70s at the time, and my mom wouldn't hear none of it. Well, and of course I'm out of state, but it came to a point where it was just too much. And even though she wouldn't listen, she ended up having a heart attack due to distress. And at that time, I took FMLA. At that time, I lived 6 hours away. I went up there, flew up there, got my father, and brought him home with me and my family so that my mom could rest and recover and get a break. And during that time, I forged a plan with my two siblings that were there in the state where my mom resided and devised a plan to get him placed in the VA system because I could not lose my mom. Not like that. And she wasn't happy with me because I stepped in. I said, you can't handle this. I can't lose you to a heart attack or worse. My father eventually went into the VA system. And during that time, my mother kept on with the church and she had more freedoms at the time, and she really seemed to enjoy that herself. And at the time, I really didn't have many concerns because she seemed to be making friends, and my mom always wanted friends. And I was, happy for her because she seemed to finally seemed to be able to beginning to come into her own. Now, a while later, I got the call that my father was nearing the end stage of his Alzheimer's, and this was in July of 23. And I was told that he had 2 weeks at most. So I did what I always did. I took leave and I flew to the state where my mother resided, and in order to, be with my mom, to be at my father's bedside. And, all the siblings were there save one who was out of the country. And I began to help my mom again around the home and just helping her through that in anticipation of the arrangements.